things you have to know about jewelry, especially old jewelry, has to do with the terminology. Now, these are the things that people are going to talk to you about as a dealer, or you might see it in an auction with the description of what's going on, and you need to know what these mean. So let's just talk about a few of the terms and what they relate to, and I'll show you images so you can understand what I'm talking about. One is repose. So repose is a pushing out of the metal. Usually you'll see this in earlier pieces, and you can see it in later ones too. And again, we're talking about Native American jewelry, but repose is really a pushing out of the metal. When this is done by hand, this again shows you it's an earlier piece. Two, you can have what's called hand-pulled wire. What that means basically is in an early, especially bracelets, instead of buying metal that was already in a wire and cutting the wire, they actually make the wire, which is really hard to do. So you have to heat up the silver, you have to pull it through a hole to make the wire, and what you see when you have hand-pulled wire is an irregularity in the wire. Now, when you see that, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because that means it's early, and it was usually made with ingot. Ingot being silver that comes often, and for the Navajo, Zuni, some of these early jewelries, it comes from Mexican pesos. It could also come from just big ingot silver that they would melt down and then make the jewelry from that ingot. And what you look for in ingot is craquelure, little areas on the back that kind of show flaking and irregularity. If you see that on the back of a bracelet, and it's usually much heavier, or any kind of, it can be in a squash blossom too, you think, okay, this is ingot, this is early. It's probably 1920s or earlier. They did do it later, but generally it's earlier. And that brings me to also hallmarks. Hallmarks are basically the signature of either the artist who made it or sometimes a guild, like we have Navajo Guild, the Hopi Guild. They have their imagery too, which tells you dates. And generally this is going to be from the 1930s and earlier, though you can see signatures in the 20s as well, but very uncommon. So generally if you see a hallmark, you want to think 30s or later, and really generally if it has a signature like initials, it's probably going to even be 40s or later. Another term that you will hear often is cold chisel. Well, what's that mean? So cold chisel is the way that early bracelets, especially early jewelry, is stamped or marked. And it really just means that. It is a chisel that is used, and they can be from very heavy to very fine, that is not heated up, the metal's not heated up, and they just are hitting on the piece, leaving a mark. And so when I see cold chisel marks, I think, okay, this is an earlier piece. Also, you have what's known as tufa cast or sand cast. Tufa cast just means it was used through volcanic rock, and they make an image, and you can see from what I'm showing you now what a tufa cast looks like, and you can make numerous pieces of jewelry of the same exact image. You can also do with sand cast, which is done in sand. So some people really like having a sand cast piece. This is not an easy thing to do. It takes a skill set to do. So, but again, when you see sand cast, tufa cast, it's probably a little bit later, you know, maybe more like a 30s kind of piece or later. And you'll see it today. It's an interesting process and thing to look for. So these are just some of the terms that you would use for early jewelry. The other thing is, let's talk about first phase belts. Okay, so these are very early. They're made out of ingot. They also, in these early time frames, 1870 to 1880s, 90s even maybe, they weren't using solder. So if they couldn't solder the piece, they couldn't put the copper on the back to attach the belt, to have the belt go through. So they just have a slot. And that slot like that, if it's made out of ingot, you see cold chisel and cold punches, then you're thinking this is a very early piece. Those are rare and they're very valuable. So when you're thinking of early jewelry, you need to know a few of these terms to be able to understand what they mean. And hopefully this will help you identify things so you know what's old and what's new. Listen to the Art Dealer Diaries. That's my new podcast. And you know, I interview all sorts of interesting people that come through my life, whether it's an art dealer or a collector or an artist, somebody that I find interesting, and I think you will too. So listen to the Art Dealer Diaries. You can find it on YouTube and on any podcast forum. Medicine Man Gallery, located for over 26 years in Tucson, Arizona, specializing in antique Native American art, early Western art, including the famed Maynard Dixon, as well as modern art. You can find everything online at medicinemangallery.com. There's over 6,000 objects to select from.
Also, the Charles Bloom Murder Mystery Series, written by yours truly, me, Mark Sublette. There's 6 books in this series, and they follow the protagonist Charles Bloom through all the intrigue of the art world set in Santa Fe and the Navajo Nation. These can be found on Audible, eBooks, Amazon, and of course, the gallery at medicinemangallery.com.